I'm Helen Turner. I'm Director of the University Partnership Midlands Innovation. My preferred pronouns are she or her. For anyone who's not able to see me today, I'm a white female, got brown hair, and today I'm wearing a black top. So today we've also been joined by a number of colleagues who are going to talk through the history and development of these EDI cards and give some example use cases. So I'll just introduce them briefly first of all. So we've got Debra Fearnshaw. She was working on the Connected Everything network when she developed or helped develop these cards. She's now Senior Project Manager at University of Nottingham, and she completed a secondment to EPSRC in 2021 within their EDI team, which helped to support the development of their EDI expectations. Also with us speaking today, we've got Peter Craigon. He's a research fellow at the Horizon Digital Economy Research Institute at the University of Nottingham. And joining the panel discussion later on, we've got Genovefa Kefalidou, who's an assistant professor in human-computer interaction at the University of Leicester, and she's also EDI lead for the College of Science and Engineering at the university. And finally joining the panel as well is Katie Severn, who's an assistant professor and Deputy Director for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at the School of Mathematical Sciences at the University of Nottingham. Before we move on to talking about the EDI cards, I thought that there might be some of you on the call who aren't familiar with Midlands Innovation. So I thought I'd just say a couple of words about what we are as a collaboration. So Midlands Innovation is a strategic university collaboration that brings together 8 research-intensive universities from across the Midlands. So our members are Aston, Birmingham, Cranfield, Keele, Leicester, Loughborough, Nottingham and Warwick universities. And we formed as a partnership in 2015 with a belief that whilst the individual universities in the partnership are strong, together we can do more, both whether that be through sessions like today, sharing best practice, or by adding our collective capabilities together to do research and innovation projects. As a partnership, we work together by jointly championing the research and innovation strengths of the Midlands, by facilitating the creation of new research communities and platforms, by partnering with other organisations to provide solutions to local challenges, and by drawing on the collective expertise within our member institutions to provide insights and data to support the collective conversations with those stakeholders. Our priorities in terms of areas for collaboration are centred around place, because we're a partnership in the Midlands, around building partnerships, around policy, around delivering collaborative projects, and also we have a strong focus on people, believing that the people in all roles that support research and innovation should be developed and celebrated. As a partnership, we want to be inclusive and we're committed to equality. But one of the roles that we believe we can play in supporting our members' equality, diversity and inclusion work is to help them in the sharing of best practice. And really that's why we're here today, to kind of draw on some of the learning and activity that's happened in the University of Nottingham and help to share that with other institutions across Midlands Innovation. So I hope that you'll find this a really productive and informative session. I think the cards are kind of fantastic tool, and I've used them to prepare consultations with my team in the past, and I hope that more people will be able to use them in the future. So that's why we're here, and that's who Midlands Innovation is. So at that point, I'll hand over to Debra to kind of give a bit more of an overview of the background to these EDI cards.
Thank you so much, Helen. Really appreciate that introduction. So for some of you who may already know, so the card started off as basically a really innovative thought of Sarah Sharples, who was PVC for EDI at Nottingham University back in 2001. And at the time, she was also the principal investigator for Connected Everything Network Plus. And that Network Plus was really committed to embedding EDI, both in everything that the network did in terms of its processes and its mechanisms, but also supporting researchers to think about EDI in the projects that they were developing, specifically in the field of digital manufacturing. So that idea was presented, and in autumn 2021, a small team of us kind of came together to kind of think about how we were going to make that idea into some sort of reality. And that's really when Peter and I started working together. And then also other people were Dr. Oliver Fisher, who was the research fellow on Connected Everything, and also were able to draw on the expertise of the EDI coordinators at Nottingham University, and specifically Emma Hadfield-Hudson. And we came together and kind of like put together some ideas which enabled us to draw down some funding from Connected Everything, which was really making sure that everything that we developed absolutely had testing at the heart of it. We didn't want to do something which wouldn't be useful, that wouldn't feel practical, that wouldn't resonate with the research community itself. So we were able to draw on the membership of Connected Everything, and particularly the early career researchers who we were really keen to involve in the development of the cards. And as a result of that, and it's so easy to make it sound like, and sometime later we had 145 cards. Obviously, there was a huge amount of work that went into creating those. And the cards both covered matters, largely matters regarding EDI, but also we had, the digital manufacturing focus as well as kind of like a research use case for the cards. Then in 2022, we were in a position where we could start presenting the cards. So we presented at Connected Everything Festival and also the University of Nottingham Diversity Festival, where we really started talking to people more about the cards, and we started having printed versions of the cards. And then in September 22, we kind of had a bit of a wrap-up session to kind of think about where had we got to, all the people involved in the testing, all the people who'd kind of like been with us. So we had a webinar. It hardly feels possible. It was just over a year ago, really, where we drew people together and said, okay, if we had a magic wand, what would we want to do with cards next, and where could we take the cards as a result of this? At this point, we had the sets of cards that we had developed, and we had the learnings from the testing and also some initial feedback from people who'd started using the cards. But what was it that people really needed to make the cards incredibly useful? And the two top things that came from that workshop in September last year was can we have some sort of guide to help us, to particularly help facilitators work through sessions with their teams, using the cards. And also, would it be possible to have a digital version of the card? Because actually printed versions of the cards, are very hard to distribute and also fairly expensive, if we're being honest. So they were the two asks. So Peter and I, kind of like as the core team, kind of took that away and pondered on it. And by Christmas last year, December last year, we were able to, we put in some funding applications, and we were successful in actually getting some additional funding to take the cards forward. So we secured that from UKRI TAS and also the University of Nottingham itself to actually go ahead and develop that digital version of the cards and also some online resources. And that really took us, again, all of that was done with testing with the community, making sure that this was, a useful resource as possible. And I guess the light bulb moment that we had during that testing phase in this year was realising that the cards could actually be really useful outside of the research space as well, which meant that, we've seen HR teams use them. We've seen them, kind of go much, much wider than perhaps the original research focus that we had, which is something we've absolutely welcomed, and it's something that we're really keen to hear more about as well. So we got those new resources, and the digital cards were put out in late August, September this year. And then as a result of doing that, there was a request for people just perhaps hear a little bit more about the cards and their development, and also, have some really practical examples of using the cards, hence the webinar today. So on that note, I will hand over to Peter.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Deborah. Thanks, Helen. Thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to come and talk about this. I'll just share my screen and we'll put some slides of presentation. I've got Deborah, if you could just keep an eye out. If anything goes wrong, just shout, because I tend to be the last to know when it does. So apologies, but fingers crossed it shouldn't be an issue. I've just got sort of a few slides just to give you may well be sort of familiar with the cards on some level, but this gives you some background and go through some of the cards just as an introduction, and then move on to some of the couple of ways I've used them, and which will hopefully lead into the discussions and sort of later on with the panel. So as I was introduced, I'm Dr. Peter Craigon. My pronouns are he, him. I'm sort of white male, short brown hair, and today wearing a dark grey top. And I'm a research fellow at Horizon Digital Economy and the Trustworthy Autonomous Systems Hub, TAS, at the University of Nottingham. And as Debra introduced, this project also involved Debra, Oliver, Emma Hadfield-Hudson as the core team, supported by Connected Everything, the Future Food Beacon, where I used to work, you at the University of Nottingham EDI, and the TAS Hub, as Debra mentioned. So just going to go through sort of the background and introduction to the EDI cards, and this is just sort of the top level thing, so I can say more about this, ask any questions in the chat or at the panel later if you want any more details, or get in touch afterwards, and I'll be happy to follow up with that.
Peter, I can't see your screen sharing.
Oh, sorry, that's probably because I haven't done it.
Okay, that's all right.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. See, this is exactly what I ask you for. Thank you, Debra. Right, that should be better.
That's perfect.
Okay,
that's great. Thank you.
I don't think I zipped past anything that was crucial there in terms of that. Thank you for highlighting that, Debra. Okay, so now starting off with the sort of the questions that we had, as Debra set out at the beginning of with sort of Sarah Sharples have the idea of, oh, wouldn't it be great if we had a sort of set of cards for EDI? And these are some of the questions that this crystallised around. So focusing on EDI, equality, diversity, inclusion, particularly related to research. And the questions which have underpinned all of this, certainly for me and for the team, is questions of how inclusive is your work? Who does it include or exclude, and how? Or how can it be made more diverse or inclusive, and how do issues of EDI apply to me and my work? So, and from a personal perspective, I sort of would call my work sort of looking at responsible innovation and issues of research integrity and research ethics. And so responsible innovation can be broadly conceived as, is research and innovation ethically acceptable, societally desirable, or sustainable? And so these questions underpin this, and down the right hand side, there's a few examples from sort of relatively recent news stories of how research and innovation may be less inclusive than we hope. So at the top there is a story about how climate science is dominated by voices from the global north rather than the global south, and therefore that who may well be sort of more significantly affected by climate change. There's also relatively sort of concerningly recently, October 2022, a development of a crash test dummy aimed at sort of the average, designed around the average women driver rather than male driver, which it has been for such a long time. And then also sort of a more socio-economic sort of issue around ensuring in the cost of living crisis, people aren't left behind in terms of ability to access the internet and all the benefits and access to information and services there. So there's a range of sort of stories of how different issues around research and innovation are inclusive or less inclusive than we might like. So this is sort of forms the basis of what we're talking about. So just to give the overview of what we've done so far, as Debra said, we've developed a prototype tool. It's very much still an ongoing work in progress. So it sort of won't claim to have anything that's ideal or finished, and sort of ongoing. Any feedback at any time is welcome with this. It's a card-based set of cards, similar to what we call ideation cards or like playing cards, which is to help people design and engage and sort of structure creativity in the design process. So to design EDI into elements of research development and research work. And we've done work in progress, a short introductory paper, there's the guide and the app, which is Debra introduced there, and there's some more detailed presentation on the cards and the guide, app and resources, and the paper at the links there, and Debra will come onto this and they'll be linked to later on, so you'll be able to look at those afterwards. So we had sort of various guiding objectives. So the idea is to make this a pragmatic tool to help researchers engage with EDI in relation to their work. We often sort of useful way of thinking about this is sort of levels of, on a base level, raising awareness of this, giving people some knowledge through the cards, some skills and ability to answer some questions, and then the sort of highest level of this reflective ability to engage with this in relation to their own work and their own project through the sort of the use cases. And you'll hopefully see some of this as we go through this. And as Debra indicated, there's always been the idea that the sort of cards be flexibly used in different ways, starting with research, but moving outside of that, as Debra mentioned. So some examples to just have a raise and discuss questions to start a conversation, sort of EDI by design, as you mentioned, that we'll come on to in a bit. And for example, sort of a retrospective assessment, you could look back at something and use the cards to help you decide what was good, what maybe was less good, or areas for development. And as Debra said, sort of exploring issues starting from the research projects as the origin of this, but also moving beyond that. So the origins of this, basically the sort of the conversation as I remember it is we have from previous work I did with Lachlan Urquhart and myself at the Horizon. Lachlan Urquhart's now a senior lecturer in technology law at the University of Edinburgh, developed a set of cards around IT ethics, particularly around personal data, so the moral IT cards, which divided into questions of privacy law, security and ethics. And by using these as a design tool, you help people sort of design in these elements to the design of IT-based systems. So we contrast that with the idea of, I'm sure, imagine you're all aware of the sort of ticking the box to agree to terms and conditions afterwards, whereas the designing it in means that these things are actually part of the system rather than just something you sign up to after not reading the terms and conditions. And as part of that, and for more details, the Journal of Responsible Innovation there, and basically Sarah Sharp said, wouldn't it be great if we had a set of these cards for EDI, and hence where we are now. So sort of jump ahead quite a long way to get onto the structure here of I can give more detail about the process to get here if that's of interest to people, but we ended up with the final sort of set of cards we got printed here of 145 cards divided into 4 broad themes and 12 categories, and I'll go through this in more detail. So there's some definitions, scenario, what am I going to do, and complications and practicalities. One of the things we need to do with the cards is actually make sure that these themes are written on the cards, because they're not currently at the moment, which quickly became sort of an oversight, which was highlighted when we're using them. And as Debra mentioned, these are developed for connected everything and developed for a digital manufacturing context. So that's the origins of where they come from. So I'll just go through an example of each of these in the next few slides. So each individual card looks like this. At the top, there is an image which is to illustrate, provide an alternative perspective, maybe slightly tangential, get people thinking in a different way, potentially. Underneath, the title to name and identify the issue of the card. Underneath this, there's some brief explanation of what the card means in relation to EDI and research. And then, crucial to the way these things work, underneath that is an open question to encourage people to put it in the context of their own work and say, you can't discard it. You have to engage with it and say, I don't think this is relevant because, or this sort of, or engage with the question through the open question there to get people to sort of think about this issue in relation to their work. And there's a category is labelled on the bottom and also coloured on the back of the card on the right hand side there. So I'll just give a quick sort of rush through whistle-stop tour of the individual categories here. So within the themes, the definitions themes, there's the definitions category, just to help people know what's meant by EDI. This is sort of maybe something for discussion, but these cards can act as a reference point for people to have a discussion and move on to other things if that is useful within the session. So includes working definitions of things like equality, diversity, inclusion and equity, for example. A lot of this work is also borne up in the Equality Act, so the definitions theme also has legal definitions. So this covers elements of the Equality Act 2010, so including things like protected characteristics and elements of discrimination, both direct and indirect, as examples there. So then we move on to the scenario theme, which is to sort of get people to understand this in the context of their scenario, what they do in their work from research and also more widely. So within this, there's the category of protected characteristics, so it helps people know and identify what the 9 protected characteristics from the Equality Act, so including disability, race, pregnancy and maternity and the others. This also, the scenario also, theme also has the other characteristics category, which is designed to make people think of issues of EDI as wider than just the legal elements of the protected characteristic of the Equality Act. So to get people to consider these elements as well. So this is a range of things which includes things such as physical characteristics, socioeconomic background and neurodiversity, for example. Then within the scenario theme, there's also the activity of context, the things you're doing, the activities you're doing on a day-to-day level in stemming from research sort of origin. So help people recognise EDI in their own work and context and highlight issues of where it might occur. So examples of things like research methods, how things are communicated, how people may be recruited, amongst others of the 20 cards there are within that set. Then within the scenario theme, there's elements of inclusion or exclusion, the ways that people may be included or excluded, to give people ideas of how these things might apply to their own work. So this includes, for example, I don't know if you see there, bias, physical inclusion or exclusion, and issues of things like microaggressions or micro-invalidations as some examples there. So the tool is always intended as a pragmatic tool, so we term the sort of next theme as what am I going to do to hopefully improve issues of EDI within the work and the exercises you do with the cards. So within this, there's the approach category, which is to give people a range of sort of ideas or approaches to help improve issues of EDI in relation to their work. So, for example, this includes representation, support, allyship, amongst others of the 20 cards there. Also important within this is sort of in terms of what am I going to do within that theme is the sort of to get an idea of where you might be aiming at or where you might be going. What are your measures of success, so you know you will have improved it or will have made some progress. So these are to highlight and help people decide how their sort of approach to improve issues of EDI will be assessed or measured. So in terms of defining some goals or aim, what sort of feedback do you want? Is it data or something intangible, for example, within those cards? Also, from the sort of discussions of EDI, and quite apparent within this, there's a range of complications and practicalities. In an ideal world, it would be great if we're able to do this all perfectly, but that's sadly not the case. So within this theme, there's a range of things which encourage and enable people to engage with these through using the cards. So there's a set of complications in this category, identify and mitigate, hopefully, elements which may complicate progress towards improvements in EDI. So, for example, there could be time elements, cost, priorities, and other such things within that. And also within the complications and practicalities theme, there's a set of what we come to term uncomfortable questions. So some of the things which people might sort of have in their head might find that sort of are, as it says, questions that they may be uncomfortable in raising, which having them written on the cards is a useful way of somebody sort of, I don't know, for example, picking up the card and saying, I think this is important, or things like this, rather than sort of having to come up with them themselves and stick their hand up and say, I think this is an issue. So to get people to engage with these potentially sort of uncomfortable elements through using the cards, so there's elements of avoidance, resistance, and tick boxing, amongst others there. As we said, these have come from a digital manufacturing context, so there's a couple of particular sets of categories directly related to that, which depending on the context of use can either be put to one side or can be used depending on how useful they are. So within the scenario theme, there's a set of industrial digital technologies which may affect and influence issues of EDI. So, for example, there AI, artificial intelligence and machine learning, automation, robots and cobots, for example. And also within the complications and practicalities theme, there's a set of what we call digital manufacturing challenges. So things that are particular to the digital manufacturing context, which may impede or influence issues of EDI. So, for example, legacy systems, finance, digital skills and knowledge, for example, there. So, as Debra introduced at the outset of this, we developed those cards, had some testing, some initial testing of this, and then sort of brought people together, and we identified the need to develop some further resources to help people use the cards. And to respond to the question, sort of, which I'm often asked, is sort of, how do you use them? Sort of early on in the process of using and developing the cards, my response is almost however you'd like, which I don't come to realise is not the most helpful, because I know people need some sort of guidance and some confidence to help with this, and Deb's going to go through and sort of show you a bit more detail about this and following this. But so coming from this, we developed a guide to help people come up with their own ways of doing it, certainly not a sort of a prescribed rule book for that, and also an app to get people to be able to access the cards on their phone or via the desktop to make them more accessible via the internet rather than the physical cards, as Debra mentioned. We've also set up and used them quite often via Miro, an online whiteboard, to replicate sessions, and there's more details in the introductory paper there. So, as I was sort of emphasised for preparing for this webinar, then this is about sort of giving people some examples of use cases and sort of useful ways of how we've used them and sort of lessons learned and things from that. So these are just a couple which are for the purposes of testing the cards that I developed sort of based on previous experience, and we found that they work and find really quite useful. So first one is what we term random draw. So this was just intended as an icebreaker, but it became more than that. So basically simple steps of sort the card out into the themes, hence why needing the themes written on the cards is a next step to help with that. Then random, pick a card in turn from each theme, and with each card drawn, a group around the table discuss what they mean, their perspective on it, what their understanding of it, and how this might sort of contribute to issues of equality, diversity and inclusion. And then you draw a card from the next theme, reflect on that, and how does that combine with the previous cards. And as you build up going through the themes, you get a sort of a drawn at random but sort of interesting, rich picture of how these issues may combine to sort of highlight issues of EDI in relation to the work from the range of things, range of potential combinations of the cards there. So, and again, you can do this, pick more cards, broaden the discussion. And this was initially intended as a sort of an icebreaker, just a quick thing to do, but been really sort of pleased by how sort of rich and sort of engaged this works. And the randomness produces interesting combinations. It may produce sort of challenging combinations. Oh, I didn't think of that. But that I've also found that is a case that, oh, I didn't think of that. But on reflection, the group who have been working with, for example, have produced some really interesting insight into this, which without that sort of randomness and drawing the cards together might not have come about, and produces some really interesting reflection. And found that instead of this being an icebreaker session, for example, just for a sort of a couple of minutes at the start, people have actually really got into this and done it a few times and actually produced some really rich, engaged discussion to show how they're able to reflect on this and draw their own experience to contribute to the group and sort of discussions of EDI. So apologies for the size of the cards here. So just on the bottom, we've got some cards that were drawn. For example, first one is inclusion. Then next one is neurodiversity. So you can maybe reflect on how inclusion and neurodiversity combine. Then third is inclusion or exclusion bias. So how might that combine with neurodiversity and inclusion? Then an approach is support there. So how might that combine with the previous ones? And then a challenge is the priorities there. So maybe just with that introduction of how those were drawn at random, you can see how maybe there's a sort of the nuances and richness of EDI in the context of work can be supported and reflected on through that random draw process, which works really well. The second, probably more structured, more in-depth example is what we term EDI by design, and this comes from something which we did with the moral IT cards. So I can give more detail about this, but this just to sketch it out. So starting off with a piece of research, a work or activity you're familiar with, could be a project or something you pick just for the exercise, and then use the cards to identify potential EDI benefit or positive, EDI harm or negative related to it, a way of maximising the benefit, minimising the harm, and then the pragmatic challenge of implementing the ways of maximising the benefit, minimising the harm. And you annotate this on the flip chart sheet, which I'll show in a second, with post-it notes to put this in context. So this just gives a very quick sort of example of one word, sort of positive and negative. So I always tend to choose an example of autonomous self-driving vehicles as a potential project or technology, and I see this as being potentially positive for those with disability, the disabled community, who may be able to become more independently mobile through using self-driving vehicles when they may well not have been able to use existing transport methods independently. You need to maximise this. You need to make sort of material design choices in order to mean that the people are actually able to do this. But then this faces the challenge of the legacy systems of how do you make this work along with the sort of the existing infrastructure and the existing sort of non-self-driving vehicles on the road. So that gives you the sort of brings out the reflection of a positive way of maximising this, but a challenge that comes from that. And on the flip side, potential negative is from sort of socioeconomic background. For example, these technologies are likely to be very expensive. So how do you sort of ensure that people can be included in this and minimise the potential negative impact there? So reflect on issues of support, by how you might support people to access or use these technologies. And this may come into the sort of friction with the challenge of different priorities of time, resources, and sort of ways of distributing limited resources around that. So this just gives you some sort of examples, very quick examples of the way the EDI by design task can give some reflections in relation of a positive and negative in relation to a particular project or technology. And this just gives an illustration of a sort of flip chart piece of paper, which if you have at the top your technology written on a post-it note, and then down the right is the positive, aligned vertically with annotations underneath to say that that's the positive, annotate, what am I going to do to maximize it, annotations and the challenges, and then equally on the left hand side is the negatives arranged in a similar way. And by doing this for sort of a few positives, a few negatives in a session of an hour and a half or so, you build up a board which gives a sort of quite an in-depth sort of reflection on how issues of designing a project or a piece of technology with EDI in mind. So this is quite structured, it works well independently, and just a different way of using the cards. So that's just we stop tour. I can say more about this in a second in the panel session. But the sort of guidance from having used these and worked with this is from having designed them, I say I've got one deck of cards, like a deck of playing cards, many games you can play with a deck of playing cards, and the idea is many ways you can use the EDI cards. And maybe some friction comes up with the idea that I've sort of step back and say I'm not going to tell people how to use them. It very much depends on your own needs and context, and the sort of the reflection of why you want to use them, what you want to get out of the session is the crucial questions for me, and sort of developing a use session with them with that in mind. And they are intended to be flexible, so come up with your own ways of doing it, try things out, and reflect and develop through doing this. So from my experience, simpler can be better, so just like the random draw cards, random draw exercise. And thing to emphasize is as a starting point, you don't need to use all the cards. A lot of people find 145 cards plonked in front of them. Oh, that's a lot. That's intimidating. So as a facilitator, you could think, oh, we'll take these 10 or these categories and then go from there. So that could be a way of making it more manageable at the start. And just as always the case, as everybody's doing, is you do something, you learn from it, and you refine it accordingly. And maybe one sort of take-home message that comes from the actual conducting of these sessions that came from the testing is that it was emphasised that EDI is not a them, it's not an abstract thing which happens to something else, but it's an us. These issues affect everybody within the room, so there needs to be sort of a consideration of this and sort of the expectations for a safe space and a safe discussion in order to ensure that that's considered and everything is done in a respectful and considerate manner within the discussion of the sessions. It's not something that should hopefully be a problem, but it's just something that was made very clear to us, and is something that is sort of needs to be considered within the discussions because it will affect the people within the room as well. So it's something to emphasise there. So that hopefully is a sort of useful, interesting whistle-stop tour of the cards and a couple of ways of using them. Happy to answer any questions with this. By all means, get in touch with if you have any questions after this. But with that, I think I've just taken the required amount of time. I'll pass on to Deborah, I think, for a bit more detail about the guide and the app. I think is that okay? I'll just stop sharing that, Deborah.
Thanks, Peter. That was great. I did realise at the start of my session I did forget to introduce myself properly, so I'm just going to take the opportunity to do now that. So I'm Debra Fearnshaw. My pronouns are she and her, and I have dark blonde hair. I'm wearing glasses today, and I am wearing a black dress with yellow flowers. So apologies for not doing that earlier. So just in terms of the resources themselves, I've just posted the link in the chat in case people haven't seen that already to the main to the home of the EDI cards on the University of Nottingham website. And the key resources that we have developed is the guide itself. One of the key things that came back from the testing sessions was please make this as short as possible. So we did really try, even though there were a huge amount of requests of things that people wanted in the guide. So we have really tried to make the guide short. And the idea is that the guide itself would eventually be turned into cards themselves, which then can be added to the digital version of the cards. So hopefully the idea was for the guide to be hopefully, you know, as accessible and as short to read as possible. So that's what we aim for. So we also have obviously the links to the digital version of the cards on the slide. When we were developing the digital version initially, we did actually think about it mainly being a mobile, you know, something that people would look on their mobile phones, and that was that design functionality that we largely had in mind. However, again, through the testing, we realised that people were really happy to use it on their laptops as well. So that was interesting, that then we had to tweak the design of the digital version so it worked well for both platforms. So that was something that we learned as we went through the testing exercises. Another request that we had was for people to have, you know, kind of like a visual example of how the cards are used. So on the resources, we have just at the moment one video of us demonstrating how the random draw exercise can be used. It is a really short film that just talks through the random draw exercise, but people, again, there was a request that people thought that just having that visualised for them was actually really useful. We don't go into EDI discussion at all, we're just showing the mechanism of how a random draw could work. We also have some examples of some lesson plans. So people have really been very generous, and they've shared how they've used the plans. And again, this really shows how the cards can be tweaked to those individual circumstances. So so that is something that again, if anyone you know, would like to share with us the materials and how they've used the cards, please always let us know, because it would be great to see those examples, you know, from a range of different projects, different you know, even different sectors. It would be great to know how the cards are being used. So if anyone does want to share those with us in the future, we'd be very, very happy to put those on the website. What we realised is there were certain limitations with the digital version of the card that we couldn't resolve. Unfortunately, we didn't have an endless budget for this, so we needed to do what we could do with the money. So one of the workarounds we did was actually create an Excel recording sheet. So if people are going through a cards exercise and they run out of time, as we often do when we're talking about complex issues, that they could actually make a note on the Excel sheet of which cards they've been through, so they might be able to pick up again at a following session, or they just have some sort of mechanism to record where they got to quite easily, just whether it's, you know, literally just ticking them off on a sheet so they know that those were the things that they recorded, which might act as a aid memoir for a future session. And again, we've tried to put together a very, very simple evaluation sheet for what people might want to do as a result of the session. And again, you know, we're not trying to be prescriptive at all in this. It was just some ideas that people felt, you know, might be useful, that came out of the testing session. So we just wanted to put some resources out there. Again, people very, very welcome to come up with their own. And then finally on the website, there was a list of other EDI resources that we also wanted to signpost to, should people want to have a look around what else is out there during the development of this. For example, Newcastle University has put out an EDI toolkit, which we thought was, you know, really, really interesting. So we've just got some signposting to some other resources as well. So that is basically the cards and resources element. Helen, have you been doing a brilliant job keeping an eye on the chat? I've seen a few questions come in, but I have I've
got a couple of questions for you. So the first one was from Laura O'Keefe, who's asking about is there a minimum number of people, you know, what number of people do the cards work best with?
That's a really good question. Shall I answer first and then Peter can follow up? So again, because of the testing nature that we had of all the cards, when we were developing the cards, it was always done as groups, and largely speaking, most of the testing was done in groups of maybe 5 to 6 people, and that enabled, you know, really good different perspective conversations, and also helped us spot our gaps as well. So, you know, when we were doing the testing, we thought, well, actually, there's no one in the group who might have, you know, an experience of X, Y, and Z. So actually, that's something for us to consider. So those conversations enabled the gaps. However, when also we got some feedback from the testing, people were like saying, actually, when I'm doing something, you know, that is perhaps a little bit less familiar to me, actually just almost shuffling through the cards and letting it provoke some thoughts. So one of the main activities that people thought that perhaps using the cards just on their own might work is actually when people think about equality impact assessments, which, you know, shouldn't be a lone activity, but just to kick that off and just to start thinking about that, then perhaps the cards could actually help, you know, trigger some thoughts that perhaps wouldn't come when you're just starting that process on your own. So I'm kind of like saying that the cards can be used both ways, but I think as with all things with EDI, it's always best to end up having a broader conversation, you know, not taking decisions, you know, or thinking about implementing things on your own. Peter?
Yeah, I think my reflection on this is I would hope that they would be adaptable to groups of all sizes. Well, I say all sizes. I think when I'd probably say 5 or 6 up to maybe, 5 or 6 is a sort of a group session if you have a sort of wider session to split people up with that. But I would hope on some level that, I don't know, as Debra was saying, that they could be used sort of individually. Like, I don't know, I always refer to card games and things like this as a sort of like you're playing solitaire, you're playing on your own, or as you say, you're flicking through the cards and getting your own reflective sort of use of those and thinking, oh, well, maybe I need to do that or I need to do this. I think there would be sort of designing your session with that in mind. I think is maybe you could do all of these things, but things like the EDI by design is probably 3+ is a good number. Something more sort of simple like flicking through can be done on their own, or maybe something in between, like the random draw can be done with groups of with probably more flexible size of groups. I think I would be reluctant to say maybe going over sort of 7 or 8 for anything is a bit more of an issue, but also it also depends on the group dynamics, which is something to keep an eye out. And if there's some people who aren't participating, then maybe there's some way of, I don't know, structuring something so that everybody has to take a turn or something like this. So it's just a case of being open and flexible and reflecting on how things are going and maybe tweaking things, and deciding on what you don't want to do accordingly. So I'm not sure that's the most helpful of giving a definitive answer, but it's just
it sounds like
they're there.
Lots of different options, which is really useful for people, I think. Rebecca Jarrett's asked, is it helpful to start with the definitions cards for groups who perhaps have less experience or confidence when talking about EDI?
Yes, basically that can be. However, we do know that there are complications with the Equality Act 2010 definitions, and it's a really good example of how our understanding of EDI has really grown since 2010. And even with the Equality Act itself, that does present, you know, a really good basis for good, you know, robust conversations about what is in the Equality Act 2010 and what isn't. So I think, that you know, it is a good starting point, and that was certainly what we were thinking about with the design of the cards, that by putting that little bit of information on every card, at least someone has someone to think about. And hopefully the idea behind the cards is that people can really explore that and, you know, check out, you know, kind of like their own information, and then, you know, maybe go away and think, right, that's something else I'm going to have a quick look at and dig a bit deeper into. Peter?
Yeah, I think I would say that those definitions are there, as Debra indicated, as a reference point, to sort of, I mean, as a maybe on some levels questionable authority, but that's sort of which we found. And it, again, depending on how you wish to use it, because you could say, okay, for the purposes of today's discussion, this is what we mean by EDI, so let's use that as a reference point, and therefore the work we want to do is sort of moving on from that. But then with a lot of the cards, I'd also say with a more advanced group or things, if people do disagree, then if they're starting a discussion and you can have that discussion, then they're valuable in itself. So I often think with the pictures or the definition saying, hang on, I don't like that, or I don't think, well, or why, what is wrong with it, or what doesn't it take into account? And that's the valuable element of the discussion, as long as that is useful to your needs and not distracting and doesn't take you off on a tangent which you'd rather not go down, and things. So there's a reference point, but again, depending on your objective.
Okay, thank you. Are there just any other questions from people? Please do put your hand up or put them in the chat. There's a comment from Leanne that some of the resources on the website need to kind of get approval to access. So I don't know if that's something we can look at afterwards.
Definitely, I'll take that up. Thank you for letting us know.
A question from Claudia. Is there anything that helps to get postgraduate students to have discussions around EDI as part of a group event? What are good topics to discuss to ensure that it doesn't get too personal? I guess keeping the conversations perhaps in spaces that are comfortable for students and things, I don't know. Do you have any views on how you can sort of start the conversations in a way that doesn't get too personal?
My initial reflection on that, and I think I found from the exercise I've done, like the EDI by design elements, is the first starting point for that is to pick a technology, a project, or things like this. And yeah, I've just recently did stuff with some PhD students, and for example, and I think, yeah, to stop it from getting too personal is maybe a recommendation of saying, okay, don't pick something which is directly personal to what you're doing, or don't pick your own project, or if for that purposes, or pick something a bit more abstract or a general thing and talk in that level, so that I think there's a sort of double-edged sword with that, because I feel that the people who did in that situation pick something that was relevant to what they're doing, got really valuable insight into it, but there needs to be a level of resilience to them of thinking, oh, they're sort of people are picking holes in what I'm doing, or this is all very personal to me and things like that. So I would not need to be tested, but I'd pick something or give a selection of things to as a starting point, which you think are less personal, rather than letting people come up with their own things. I think so. Some thinking of that in advance and picking some examples accordingly to hopefully mitigate that risk.
So kind of preparation in advance and focusing the structure of that conversation on something that's a bit more further away, removed from the individuals themselves, and kind of applying it to something practical and using that as a tool to get ideas coming out of the group.
And I think sometimes collectively getting the group at the start of the session to kind of agree their own ground rules. So therefore, you know, what is not necessarily personal to one person, but is very personal to another, you know, that sort of thing can kind of get teased out a little bit. So often just, you know, understanding, you know, what this space is going to achieve and what people are agreed about, you know, what is going to be shared, and getting that consensus at the beginning often helps those sessions go quite well.
Yeah, Shimon just put in something in the chat about setting some ground rules for psychological safety at the start of the conversation. Veronica's asked, how much do the cards cost? So I don't know if you're selling the cards. I know you've got online versions that are on the website that people can get for free, I think. But
that's it. We haven't been. So we are not intending to sell the cards. This is certainly not a sales pitch today. So obviously the digital version is out there for everyone to access. And that was, you know, one of the reasons for going ahead with the digital version, is that we knew distributing physical cards was going to be extremely tricky. And we've tried to see whether there's a web store and that sort of thing that we can set up. And in all honesty, that is just something at this moment in time, you know, we are absolutely struggling to do. So that's why the reason why the digital cards were set out there. We don't have that many at all of the printed packs, if I'm being honest with you. So it really was saying, you know, if we want to get the cards out there, then the digital ones were the feature. Right at the beginning of the session, someone did mention about having a PDF version. I did put a link in the chat for the PDF version if people did want to just print out a selection of the cards themselves. You know, no means do you need to be printing out all 145. You can select which ones might be useful. But we are aware that there are typos in that version. It is something that Peter and I are looking to rectify. We did well, we're hoping we rectified all the typos for the digital version, but we haven't done the PDF version, so that's something that we are hoping to do. So sorry, that's probably not a very satisfactory answer.
I completely agree with all of that, Deborah. I mean, one of the things that cards is something which people have hooked onto stuff I do. So there's various other sets. So, and each of the projects has a sort of, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could make this available in some way? So there's sort of lots of parallel ways of sort of making them available so people can buy them without sort of needing to come to us all of the time, not as a sort of commercial enterprise, but as a sort of making them available. So that's, yeah, it's quite prominent in discussions around all of these things. We haven't quite arrived at the best satisfactory solution without replicating the effort and things like this. So I suppose it's not most helpful, but it's a watch this space and run sort of, because the physical cards is a really helpful, really useful way of doing it. So we would hope to do it in some way, but we don't quite know how yet.
So kind of in summary, you can get them on the website. There's PDFs, and those PDFs will be improved at some point. And the team is working on kind of thinking about how physical cards might be available in the future, but obviously acknowledging that that's quite costly, and everything that you've been doing has been sort of funded via research councils and things.
Deborah, do you have a better grasp? Was it about £10 or £15 a set from what we ordered previously?
When we ordered them last year, they were £15 a set. I'm assuming with the wonderful world of inflation, that's only gone upwards.
Okay. I mean, it's just economies of scale. If you order millions, then you'll get them really cheap. But that's the way you are. But yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any more questions from anyone on the call? If not, we'll move on to the sort of panel session where we're going to be joined by Genovefa and Katie, who are going to kind of talk through some of the times that they've used the cards themselves. And Peter's going to stay on as well to answer some questions. So I don't know if you'd both like to introduce yourselves, or
shall I go first?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you again for being invited actually here today. My name is Genovefa. It's pronounced as Genovefa Kefalidou, and my pronouns are she, her. And I'm wearing today a denim shirt and my glasses as well.
Thank you. And Katie?
Hi, I'm Katie. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a female with glasses, brown hair, and I'm wearing a grey fleece.
Fantastic. I just wanted to start by asking you both, how did you hear about the cards and what attracted you to using them?
Shall I go first?
Yeah, that would be lovely, Katie.
So I'm at the University of Nottingham, and I really just heard of it from other staff members. I think someone I knew had gone to a testing session and was basically saying how great they were. So I signed up for one of the testing sessions for the digital cards and got to sort of experience them then. So yeah, it was really through just other people saying sort of how great they were, and they were like, you should check them out.
Brilliant, thank you.
The same happened with me, actually. I was one of those people that took part in the workshops that they were organized by Debra and Peter in order to shape up the cards. So it's been a really exciting process to be part of this and to see the development, the gradual development of the different versions of the cards, including obviously the digital ones. But I've also been very much exposed to these process from within my role within the TAS, Trustworthy Autonomous Systems Verifiability Node, and the work and liaison that I've been doing with the TAS Hub. So we had a lot of different opportunities to work on that front as part of the TAS community. And obviously, with my role as a co-chair on the EDI working group, we got the opportunity, and myself as well, to directly get involved into shaping up the ways that these EDI cards could be utilized more practically, but also how they can be more communicated to the broader community as a way to help with reflection and design.
Yeah, thank you. And how have you both used the cards in your own work? I think, Katie, you've used them in some more student-focused activities, is that correct?
Yes, I've used them for both staff and students. But again, the first time I think I sort of led a session with them was for students. So I held a one-day conference on diversity and I knew I really wanted to have some interactive elements. So students weren't just listening to talks, but also to really encourage them that EDI is something they need to be active in, and not just listening. So as soon as I was thinking of what to do, I was like, well, the cards fill that hole perfectly. So I used them with students, and yeah, it worked really well. I think I had to be really careful making it very clear what they needed to do. So I think sometimes you can sort of leave people with the cards to discuss, whereas I walked through an example with the students, and had sort of pictures, so really step by step what to do, and then had quite a lot of prompts that I added for them to think about, so not just the prompts on the card, and steered it to what the sort of conference was about, so linking back. So it talked about how cards, if they felt they were relevant to them, if they thought it was relevant to careers they might want to go into, and also just acknowledging whether this was a conversation they were likely to have before. So the hope was that it might see that, well, for some of them might say, yeah, I do talk about EDI things. Others, they might say, actually, this has really helped prompt those conversations. So yeah, it was really good, and the students really engaged with it. I think, again, with students, when I first did it and sort of then said discuss, and told them to discuss in very small groups, so it was kind of safer. There's a bit of silence to start with, and the worry of, oh no, is it going to be silence? But once you give them a little bit of time, there was then loads of discussion, and by the time I was then saying, okay, we've got to finish discussion, they all wanted to carry on. So it was just having a bit of patience at the start, and then yeah, once they get started talking, they didn't want to stop.
That sounds really positive. So you kind of put in quite a bit of prep work, it sounds like, sort of thinking about the additional bits that you needed to build in to enable the students to have a kind of safe conversation, and kind of focused on having them in smaller groups. And as a result, you kind of got quite a sort of rich conversation from the students, which they obviously really valued. So that sounds really positive. Yeah. Have you used them, Genovefa?
Yeah, I've used them actually quite a bit in different kind of contexts. So similarly to what Katie said, I've used them to work with staff and students in different sessions, of course, at the University of Leicester, where I'm located. Just to give you a couple of examples, so I've used them in funded projects that I've got. One of them was a Wellcome Trust ISSF funding that I got in order to investigate and explore inequalities within the context of research culture. So I've organized workshops to actually try and elicit some requirements, some reflections on that front, and I've utilized parts of the EDI cards. The thing that I found quite striking in these cases is because the research culture and inequities, or hidden inequities and inequalities as well, is a very big and hot topic, very rich. The cards were not able, I was not able to utilize all the cards, of course, because they are very rich themselves. They cover a lot of different things. So it was very much a responsive approach in applying those. So seeing how people were feeling with those, what were the discussions triggered, and how much time was allowed to do that. So I had to adapt on the go in regards to which cards are being utilized in each case. I've utilized a lot the approach cards, but also the inequities, equalities. But again, because they are so rich and the topic of discussion was very, very engaging and rich, I was not able to go through everything, but it was extremely helpful to trigger and stir up discussions and provide additional reflections on the topic. That's something that was applied within small group workshops. So 5 5 people. I've also utilized the cards on another funded project that I got with my colleagues and with colleagues from the Open University, which was funded by CP8C. And the idea was to go through a number of different activities, including a workshop, in order to help us understand decolonizing computing. So this was a workshop activity that I've organized with something like 30 plus people from across the UK, from across higher education institutions in the UK. So completely different setting. It worked very well. I've applied those in combination with other techniques. So brainstorming, word cloud generation, and explicitly I've embedded card sorting activities with EDI cards, because obviously as people from human computer interaction field may know already, card sorting helps very much with identifying mental models. So that's the reason, that's the rationale for utilizing those in this workshop. And a third example is I've employed it as part of a workshop again that I've organized as part of International Women's Day celebrations, and that was again in order to raise awareness. So in effect, I've utilized EDI cards both for reflective purposes, but also for raising awareness on certain aspects. And again, in this case, it was a combination of students and staff that participated. Something we're talking about numbers, something like, again, 30, around 30 people.
Fantastic, thank you. It sounds like you've been both using them in quite a variety of ways. Have you encountered any difficulties, either people sort of not responding kind of well to the approach, or kind of what you have to do in advance to sort of to kind of structure your sessions, or has it all been pretty straightforward and they've been well received?
I think for me, well received. I think the hardest thing is, like I mentioned, is at the very start, where you kind of say start the discussion and there's that silence, and I think you just have to like let people just sit for a while to just think, and they're not going to start discussion straight away. But I found in general, I think the cards almost make people feel safer, because they've kind of they can start off just discussing the actual cards. They don't have to put any personal opinion or anything in, because I think sometimes with EDI conversations, people are really worried they're going to say the wrong thing. So, and that just stops them wanting to engage at all. Whereas when they've got the cards, they've kind of got a bit of they feel a bit safer, because the cards are there to start that discussion for them. So yeah, I think that's really helped, and I can see that from the discussion, and also just people. I mean, I've tried to do EDI type conversations in the past, and particularly with students. When I've done it before, and I think they're broader and don't have any kind of resource, it really is just silence, and it stays silent. And I'll try and get people to anonymously submit things, and it's, again, there's no submissions so it's not even they don't want to talk. Whereas with this, yeah, I think the entry is very easy. They can even just start off going, oh, I didn't know that was a protected characteristic, or I hadn't thought about that. So it's a very safe thing to say. And then as they get more comfortable, they can then start to have the trickier conversations or slightly deeper ones. So yeah, it has all been very positive for me.
Brilliant, thank you.
Likewise, I would say it's overall, it's been very, very positive. People's feedback has been acknowledging how useful they can be. There have been similar situations, as Katie mentioned, about warming up, getting people to actually get into the flow and the frame of mind to actually use them. But the other thing that I've noticed in certain cases is that participants in the sessions that I've organized were asking for clarifications, because there are a number of things that would need a bit of more contextualization in order to be able to use the cards. And I think that is very good. That's quite positive. That's how we've been seeing it, because that triggered additional discussions and reflections on the definitions, on the different approaches, but certainly a bit of staring on, in terms of the context of what the meaning is, trying to communicate it through those cards is important as at the beginning of any session.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. This is all flurried, caused a flurry of questions in the chat, so I might pick some of those up there. So one from Mia, how do you get those who don't want to be involved in EDI or don't consider EDI priority engaged? I don't know, Peter, as well, if you've got any reflections on that from some of the, I guess, the sessions that you've been running.
It's a difficult question, that ultimately, because I always say that if they're not interested, then they're not going to have appeared in one of our sessions or come along to any of these situations. So there's that difficulty in things like this. But I mean, maybe a reflection on that is that something I echo exactly what is really interesting to hear what Genovefa and Katie have been saying, because I haven't heard that before, and also it reflects my experience and things about warming people up and things like that. But the thing I find is that I'm really pleased is that how people are able to relate this to their own. They have stuff to say. Everybody seems to have stuff to say, have some reflection on this. So it's a case of, it's not EDI that this is some sort of university initiative which tells us we have to do this. This is we pick two cards and I can relate that to my experience. So therefore it's less a case of, I'm not saying that they don't consider that, not like park EDI, but almost like pick the two cards and you can discuss them. And then you're having an EDI conversation. You don't need to label it as such, almost, and things like this. So so I think I feel like that's more of a guess at the moment rather than based on any particular evidence. But again, it's difficult if you sort of, because I'm not sure I've come up with somebody who's sort of
not interested,
against or sort of not completely on board. And it would be interesting to say, although, so yes.
And maybe Genovefa or Katie, in your sessions, have you come across people? So
I've never had anyone sort of that's actively against EDI, but I ran it at a staff event, and it wasn't sort of self-selecting people. So I think that to me is the way to do it, is that having it added in. So I think this was an away day that we added it in. So a lot of people naturally were engaged, but I'm sure there were some people in there that wouldn't, if I'd have advertised it, wouldn't have attended in any way. So I think the cards are nice and they can be quite a short activity, that if you've got some other meeting or longer event, adding it in, so it doesn't need to be an EDI event that you're having it. It's a normal thing, which I think is really powerful anyway, to kind of show EDI is everyone's responsibility and it doesn't need to be a specific focus, actually just adding it in. So something I'd like to do that I've not done yet is say at in my department, the school meetings, maybe trying to ask, can we have just 5 minutes and we just pick two cards and have a discussion, and do that every school meeting. So you're never having a long one. It's not taking a lot of time from people that maybe aren't as engaged, but it forces everyone to talk about it and forces that engagement. And if they want to, in that meeting sit and completely disengage, they can, but it is there and they've got that opportunity and that space to engage. So it would help the people that are more on the fringe actually get involved.
That sounds really, really practical. Genovefa, I wondered if you might be able to help answer Lenny's question, because you talked about the kind of mix of staff student events. Lenny's asking, how have you found running sessions that combine staff and students? Does it encourage greater debate, or are some people perhaps more reserved because of the sort of power imbalances between the students and the staff?
Okay. That's a very good question. Actually, from my experience so far, when I had mixed groups, it was only positive. The only thing that it was a bit challenging was when, for example, it involved activities like card sorting, where in effect the priorities that a member of staff puts can be different from students. So then we had to devise on the fly different ways that we can actually get, track down both rankings without messing up with the cards and making sure we capture both sides. So that's something that I've observed within my own sessions. But other than that, I didn't see any negative, let's say, impact of having a mixed group. Rather, I would say I've witnessed quite interesting debates and, like in effect, discussing different viewpoints, which are absolutely critical.
So it's actually enabled quite healthy conversation. Peter, sorry.
There's just one. It's not something I've tested or done, but it's something I always have in my head of something that a way I quite like to use these cards and others. If there is a sort of power dynamic and things like this, then something like, I don't know, either an anonymous sort of picking a card, or sort of, I don't, you go and sort of, oh, we're using this as a tool, have a group, everyone picks a card that they think is an important issue, and therefore you have some sort of anonymous, you take out the cards and the sort of, just the example, I don't know if you have the boss or the head of the thing, oh, I think this is the problem, what is the agenda, and then you have a sort of a collection of the cards, and then suddenly they come out and say, oh, I didn't think of that. And then it's a way of getting that on the agenda, getting that people to talk about that. So I haven't tried that, but that's some way of sort of having some sort of voting or anonymous way of using the framework and the cards and the discussions there to put something, to put a view across that by playing a card rather than sticking your hand up and saying stuff which you may be less comfortable in doing. So I don't know, that's something I'd like to try at some point, or like to see at some point. But
thanks, Peter. And Leanne is asking, has anyone used the cards as part of a research project equality impact assessment, either kind of at the proposal stage or for monitoring and review? So it doesn't look like Katie, you haven't.
I haven't, no.
No. Peter, has that come up in any of the testing that you've done?
I mean, I think the EDI by design exercise is working towards that, so you could integrate that into a project. I mean, that's one of the observations from the exercises I've done, is almost like they've been focused on using them as a way of testing the cards and things, and testing the ways of doing it and the guide and such things like that. So that's why I've been so interested to hear Genovefa's and Katie's view of doing it in, I was going to say in real life, but that's not quite the right way of doing it. So I would hope that, and I think that those processes would be adaptable to being an equality impact assessment or part of a research project. The question which you have with these cards as well as others is almost, you have a really nice conversation, people like them, but okay, how do we sort of integrate this into sort of a day-to-day work as business as usual almost sort of thing, so it's something that people can actually do rather than it becomes a normal thing that people do rather than a special session or things like that. So that's maybe something that we need to consider more as sort of, okay, yeah, we can do this, but in order for it to work and be adopted widely, then we need to make it more streamlined or make it more like this and things like that. So yes, yeah, I suppose that's not a helpful answer to the question, but sort of something we've considered, certainly.
I guess kind of looking at the time, moving towards wrapping things up, I've got a question from Leah, who's talking about, she knows that the EIA process and form is being reviewed when doing things, strategic decisions, and she wondered if those in charge of projects have looked at the cards or reached out to you. I think this might be a Nottingham focused question. Debra's left
yeah, I'll just appear by magic. Yeah, so this is, I think this is Nottingham University Pacific. So yes, I have been in touch with the HR team, which is looking at the equality impact assessments, and yes, yeah, we have spoken about the cards. So there is a view to, including those into, and looking at them into any reviews. But yes, the team is aware of them.
Brilliant, thanks, Debra. And probably if we end on kind of maybe what have you learned from the cards, and what advice would you give for people who are thinking about using the cards in the future, maybe having a first go with them? I don't know, Katie, would you be able to go first? Kind of tips and lessons learned.
So I'd say to start off, particularly if you've never used them, my starting advice would be to just have a look yourself and have a very quick go, kind of play through yourself or with a very small group of people you know well, just so you can get familiar with the cards and think what's going to work in the contexts you want. I think one thing is because there's so many, I think sometimes you can think, oh, I need to know all the cards, I need to be an expert, and you really don't. You want to be comfortable that you know the idea of whatever activity you're going to do, but there still will be cards that I've never read, and I'm sure that there'd be things that would come up that I wouldn't know about myself. So I think don't let that be a barrier to start thinking I need to know every single card or be an expert. Just being comfortable with the idea. I'd also say when you run the events, pitching it like that. So again, I think it was Peter that said it, where EDI isn't us. I always find it much more useful where you can pitch it as like you're part of the us. So it's not you as an expert coming and telling people what to do. You're kind of part, and you're helping facilitate discussions. So again, sometimes there might be a question about a card or something that you won't know the answer to, and that's completely fine. So don't let that be a barrier to start. I think, yeah, they can be super flexible. So if there's anything that you think, I wonder if they'll work for this, my guess is that they will. It might be that you have to adapt it ever so slightly. And again, have a think beforehand how it will work. But they are a really great tool to start EDI conversations in multiple contexts. So yeah, if you're thinking about it, probably it will work. And it's been just really nice getting people into EDI conversations that aren't normally. So I think that's one of the things I've really seen, is that there's lots of people have things that they want to say, that perhaps in the past I'd have thought, oh, they don't have anything to say on it, or they don't want to, whereas actually they do. They just need that entry in, and getting those people to join that space is really useful. And also, I guess the other thing I've learned is just when you get two cards, you might see something and think, oh, it's really obvious how to link these cards, and somebody else has thought of something completely different. So that's one thing I've really enjoyed seeing, is just how different people think, and what is obvious to one person is really not obvious to the other, and everyone's lived experiences brought out in these cards sometimes, and that's really nice. And just a reminder again that what I think of isn't what everybody else is thinking of, and yeah, vice versa for them.
Brilliant. Thank you, Katie. Genovefa?
I would certainly, definitely agree with what Katie said. I think I've already mentioned insights and what I've learned during the use of the cards. But I would say overall, if someone was to use them for a first time, I would say a bit pay extra attention, or think carefully of what kind of other methods you employ while using the cards, because that's quite critical to make best use of the cards in an unambiguous way. So make sure that you have a clear task planned beforehand, rather than just giving the cards as they are to people, because they can be quite overwhelming. And as I said, my experience has shown me that there can be differences on the way that people contextualize the cards, as long as you make it clear at the beginning of any session that the cards are just there to guide you, not to dictate things. That's very important, and that will make for a more efficient and productive session, actually, in terms of EDI reflections.
Brilliant, thank you. I think some kind of common points coming out there about the importance of preparation and kind of thinking about your session, but also not kind of using the cards as a guide, and not being kind of afraid to kind of get started. Is there anything else you would add, Peter, as a kind of last word in that sort of top tips? Or
I would just echo that. I mean, yeah, it's just it's exactly that, having them as flexible sort of interpretation as a guide. It's a case of, say, there's not a wrong way of doing it, or there's a right way of doing it. I think that's the thing that I find, as Katie was saying, really, really interesting. The thing that I really enjoy doing the sessions, because I'm always guaranteed to learn or find, oh, I didn't think of that, and that's a really interesting perspective. And exactly as you say, it'll be different for somebody else. On a practical level, I think, of, again, echoing what Katie said, of trying things out in advance, and as from various card sessions, giving some examples and instructions and things like that at the beginning of the things you'd like to do, not sort of hard and fast necessarily, but sort of, okay, do this, and then here's a worked example, and then people might say, oh, I do understand that, oh, now I understand that, and go back to it, and things like this, just so they can feel confident in doing that. And also it may or may not work, but one of the things I find for the sessions is, could people get into the conversations, is almost that doing all the instructions at the beginning and then winding people up and letting them go is almost the case, because as everyone's saying, that they might take a bit of the time to get warmed up, but then they may not want to stop. So it works better if they've got that time to do it, rather than, okay, we do 10 minutes, stop and do more instructions and things like that. But yeah, I think they're the things I found helpful, but it's all context dependent. Brilliant,
thank you. Well, we're kind of drawing to the end of time, so kind of firstly, thank you to everyone that's joined us on the call for taking your time out of what I'm sure busy schedules, and I'm sure lots of you will have another Teams meeting or something starting in a little under 10 minutes, so we'll try and make sure that you'll have time for a cup of coffee before then. Particular thank you to Genovefa and Katie for kind of coming along and sharing experiences of how you've used the cards. I found that really sort of brought them to life, and of course a huge thanks to Peter and to Debra for kind of all the work that you've put in over a number of years to get them to this point. I know, Debra, you've already shared links to the cards in the chat, and I think you sent them out in the joining email as well. So please, everyone that's on the call, do take the time to have a good look at what's the resources that are available on the website, and I'm sure that Debra and Peter will be really keen to hear examples of how you've been using the cards and any feedback, because as I think you'll have got from the presentations at the start, it's very much a kind of work in progress and a development, and a bit of a passion project, I think, as well. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for all the hard work, for your time, and do keep in touch, and I'm sure we'll do something again in the future if there's interest.